Some souls are recognized long before a single word is spoken. Dawn had barely begun to soften the dark outline of Blackwood Palace when King Ethan Blackwood crossed the quiet courtyard toward the royal stables, following a strange pull he could not explain. Frost shimmered across the wooden fences, and every breath drifted into the cold morning air like pale smoke. Stable hands stood frozen several yards away, whispering in frightened confusion, none of them daring to take another step. Even the horses, usually restless before sunrise, remained perfectly still, their ears forward, their attention fixed on the last stall. Ethan frowned. His wolf had disappeared before midnight, something it had never done without reason. For years the great silver beast had guarded only one thing, its king. Yet this morning every royal guard insisted they had seen the enormous wolf slip silently into the stables and refuse to leave. The moment Ethan reached the open doorway, the whispers stopped. His heartbeat slowed, not from fear, but from disbelief. There, beneath a blanket of fresh straw, a young woman lay asleep, curled against an old saddle as though exhaustion had stolen every ounce of strength she possessed. Her worn brown coat was far too thin for the bitter autumn night. A few loose strands of ash-blonde hair rested across her face, hiding eyes that had not yet opened to the morning. She looked no older than 22, her hands rough from honest work, her boots stained with hay and mud. Around her, like an unbreakable fortress, rested the largest wolf anyone in the kingdom had ever seen. Ethan's wolf had curled its massive body around the sleeping stable girl, its thick silver tail wrapped gently across the entrance like a living wall. Every slow breath from the beast carried warmth toward her, shielding her from the freezing air. No one had ordered it. No one could have imagined it. The royal guards had tried to approach before sunrise, but each quiet step had been answered by a low warning rumble that shook the wooden beams overhead. Not a threat born of anger, but of unwavering protection. Ethan had led armies into impossible battles. His wolf had stood beside him through every victory and every loss. It trusted no stranger. It accepted no unnecessary touch. Yet now it guarded a forgotten stable worker as though the entire kingdom depended on her peaceful sleep. One of the older stable masters finally found his voice. "Your Majesty, her name is Claire Bennett. She cleans the stalls and feeds the horses. She never complains. She asked for nothing." Ethan barely heard him. His attention never left the sleeping girl. Tiny lines of weariness lingered across her face, evidence of countless mornings that had begun before sunrise and ended long after sunset. She had not chosen this bed of straw. She had simply accepted it. Then something even stranger happened. Claire shifted slightly in her sleep, almost as if startled by a distant dream. Without opening her eyes, her hand drifted forward until her fingertips rested lightly against the thick silver fur covering the wolf's shoulder. Every witness stopped breathing. Instead of pulling away, the beast lowered its enormous head, closed its golden eyes, and released the deepest, calmest sigh Ethan had ever heard. In that silent moment, before anyone understood why fate had led them there, the Alpha King realized one impossible truth. His wolf had already made a choice that his own heart had not yet begun to understand. Claire Bennett woke slowly, not because of the cold that had followed her through countless mornings, but because for the first time in years she felt warm. She frowned softly before opening her eyes, confused by the steady rhythm beneath her fingertips. It was not the rough wooden floor of the stable. It was not a folded blanket. It was something alive. Her eyes fluttered open, and brilliant strands of silver fur filled her vision. For one impossible second, she believed she was still dreaming. Then the enormous wolf lifted its head, meeting her gaze with calm golden eyes that held neither anger nor hunger, only quiet recognition. Claire froze. Every story she had ever heard about the Alpha King's wolf came rushing back at once. Children whispered that the beast could sense lies before they were spoken. Travelers claimed it never allowed strangers within 20 feet of its master. Stable workers often joked that even the bravest soldiers became nervous whenever those golden eyes turned toward them. Yet now the legendary creature simply watched her, almost patiently, as if waiting for her to understand something it could not explain. Claire carefully pulled her hand away and whispered, "I am sorry. I did not mean to disturb you." Instead of moving, the wolf lowered its head again until its broad muzzle rested beside her worn boot. Around the stable, No one made a sound. The stable hands stared from the doorway with expressions balanced somewhere between wonder and disbelief. One young groom quietly crossed himself. Another whispered that the moon goddess herself must have sent the girl. Ethan remained exactly where he stood. His face revealed little, but inside, questions crowded every thought. His wolf was not simply calm. It was content. There was a difference, and Ethan knew it better than anyone alive. The silver beast had always reacted through instinct older than memory itself. It had ignored royal ceremonies, dismissed noble families, and shown little interest in anyone beyond its king. Yet beside Claire Bennett, it behaved like a faithful guardian who had finally found what it had been searching for. Claire slowly pushed herself upright, brushing loose strands of straw from her coat before realizing dozens of eyes were fixed on her. Embarrassment rushed into her cheeks. "I am sorry," she repeated, standing quickly. "I should already be cleaning the stalls." She bent to gather a fallen bucket, determined to disappear before anyone could accuse her of causing trouble. Before she managed a single step, the wolf rose with her. The movement was smooth and effortless. Its towering body remained so close that no one else could approach. Claire blinked in confusion. She stepped to the left. The wolf matched her. She turned toward the stable door. Again, it followed, not crowding her, not frightening her, simply remaining between her and every other person in the room. A nervous laugh escaped one of the younger stable boys. "It thinks it belongs with her." No one answered because no one could deny what they were witnessing. Ethan finally walked forward, each measured step echoing across the wooden floor. His wolf glanced toward him but refused to leave Claire's side. The king stopped only a few feet away. Claire lowered her eyes immediately, unaware she stood before the ruler of the Northern Territories. "Forgive me, sir," she said quietly. "If I have done something wrong, I will accept whatever punishment is fair." Ethan studied her tired face, her worn clothes, and the quiet dignity that remained despite years of hardship. Then he looked once more at the silver wolf standing faithfully beside her, and for the first time in his reign, the Alpha King realized there were ancient laws written not by kingdoms, but by the silent instincts of a loyal heart. Claire expected the king to question her, perhaps even order her removed from the royal stables, but the silence stretched between them instead. It was not an uncomfortable silence. It was the kind that settled over the forest before the first snowfall, calm yet filled with unseen meaning. Ethan Blackwood looked at the young woman standing before him and noticed details everyone else had overlooked. Her sleeves had been carefully stitched together more than once. The leather on her boots had nearly worn through. A faint trace of hay dust clung to her coat, yet every horse inside the stable remained peaceful around her. Even the oldest mare, famous for refusing strangers, leaned across the wooden divider and gently brushed her nose against Claire's shoulder. Claire smiled without thinking. She lifted one hand and softly rubbed the mare between the ears. "Good morning, Willow," she whispered. "Did you sleep well?" The mare answered with a quiet breath, relaxing so completely that several stable hands exchanged surprised glances. "She never lets anyone touch her before breakfast," one of them murmured. Another nodded. "Not even me. And I have cared for her for 10 years. Ethan listened without interrupting. His wolf remained beside Claire, watching every movement she made with peaceful attention. Then another horse stamped nervously farther down the aisle. Before any groom could react, Claire instinctively walked toward it. The great silver wolf followed one step behind, yet the frightened stallion did not panic. Instead, the powerful animal lowered its head as Claire reached the stall door. "Easy now," she said gently. "You are safe." Her voice was quiet enough that only those closest could hear it, but somehow every restless horse inside the stable settled almost immediately. The nervous energy that usually filled the building each morning simply disappeared. Ethan had witnessed experienced handlers struggle for nearly an hour to calm frightened warhorses after thunderstorms. Claire accomplished the same thing with nothing more than patience and kindness. She did not seem aware that anything unusual had happened. To her, this was simply another morning caring for animals that depended on her. As she finished checking the stallion's water bucket, she suddenly realized everyone was still watching. Her smile faded into uncertainty. "Did I forget something?" she asked softly. "If I made a mistake, I can fix it." No one answered at first. Finally, the elderly stable master cleared his throat. You have worked here almost 3 years, Claire. She nodded. Since I turned 19. And every morning the horses wait for you before they eat. Claire looked genuinely confused. They are only being friendly. Several stable hands quietly shook their heads. They had seen countless workers come and go, but never anything like this. Ethan slowly approached the stall where Claire stood. This time his wolf did not block his path. Instead, the silver beast looked from its king to the young woman, almost encouraging the distance between them to disappear. Ethan rested one hand against the wooden gate and asked the simplest question he could think of. Who taught you to care for animals this way? Claire hesitated before answering. My father. A small smile touched her lips, touched by memories that still warmed her heart. He always said frightened hearts listen before frightened minds do. If you show fear, they become afraid. If you show patience, eventually they remember they are safe. Ethan held her words in silence. They sounded less like stable advice and more like forgotten wisdom, carried across generations. Before he could ask another question, a white dove suddenly fluttered through the open stable door. It circled once above the rafters before gliding down without hesitation to land on Claire's shoulder. She laughed softly in surprise while the tiny bird tucked its head comfortably against her neck. Every eye in the stable widened once again. Ethan felt something ancient stir deep within his own spirit, because this was no longer a single impossible coincidence. It was the beginning of a mystery that neither a king nor an entire kingdom would be able to ignore. By noon, the strange events in the royal stables had spread through every hallway of Blackwood Palace. Servants whispered while polishing silver trays. Guards exchanged uncertain glances during their watch. Cooks paused in the middle of preparing the evening meal just to repeat the unbelievable story. Some claimed the Alpha King's wolf had chosen a stable girl. Others insisted she must possess hidden magic. With every retelling, the truth became harder to recognize. Claire Bennett knew none of it. She spent the afternoon exactly as she always had, carrying fresh hay, filling water buckets, and brushing the horses until their coats gleamed beneath the sunlight pouring through the stable windows. She noticed only that more people than usual walked past the doors pretending to have important errands while secretly trying to catch a glimpse of her. Whenever she looked up, they quickly turned away. The attention made her uneasy. She had spent years trying not to be noticed, believing quiet work was the safest way to survive inside a palace where servants were easily forgotten. Across the courtyard, however, another story was beginning to unfold. Lady Vivian Ashcroft stood beside a marble fountain, listening with growing disbelief as two noble women described what they had witnessed. The wolf never left her side, one said. Even the king could not call it away at first. Vivian's pleasant smile never faltered, but her fingers tightened around the embroidered handkerchief she carried. For months, she had believed everyone expected her to become Ethan Blackwood's future queen. She had been raised among the highest families, educated in royal customs, admired at every formal gathering. Now the palace spoke of a stable girl instead of her. Surely you misunderstand, Vivian replied smoothly. His Majesty values loyalty and dignity. He would never concern himself with someone who sleeps in a stable. Yet even as she spoke, doubt quietly settled into her thoughts. By late afternoon, she found the palace steward, Harold Whitmore, reviewing supply records outside the servant quarters. Tell me about Claire Bennett, Vivian asked with practiced politeness. Harold sighed. There is not much to tell. She arrived nearly 3 years ago asking only for honest work. She has never missed a morning, never complained, never asked for higher wages. No family, Vivian asked. None that we know of. She says her parents passed away years ago. She keeps to herself. Vivian nodded thoughtfully, but her eyes had already grown colder. People without family were easy to dismiss, easy to blame, easy to send away. As evening settled across the palace grounds, Claire carried one final basket of oats toward the oldest pasture where several retired carriage horses grazed peacefully. Before she reached the fence, every horse lifted its head at once. One after another they walked toward her, surrounding the wooden gate in perfect silence. Claire laughed softly and shook her head. You all act as though I brought apples instead. She reached through the fence, scratching the nearest horse beneath its chin. Hidden behind a row of oak trees, Ethan had witnessed the entire moment. He had come searching for answers, hoping to prove that the morning had been nothing more than an unusual accident. Instead, he found every animal responding to Claire with effortless trust once again. Beside him, the silver wolf remained completely relaxed, watching the young woman with quiet certainty. Ethan exhaled slowly, realizing each hour only deepened the mystery. Somewhere within the palace walls, jealousy had already begun to take root. But beyond whispers, titles, and expectations, the oldest instincts in the kingdom continued pointing toward the same forgotten stable girl, and neither power had found nothing that fully explained Claire Bennett. What he witnessed now only deepened his curiosity. She never demanded obedience. She never displayed unusual power. She simply offered patience, kindness, and quiet confidence, and every creature answered in return. As Claire turned to leave the paddock, several small birds descended from the nearby branches, hopping across the fence rails before fluttering around her feet in cheerful curiosity. She laughed under her breath. "You already had breakfast," she teased, reaching into her apron pocket and discovering a few leftover oat kernels. She scattered them across the ground, and the birds happily gathered around her without the slightest fear. Ethan smiled before he realized he was smiling. It had been years since anything inside the palace had surprised him in a pleasant way. Court meetings, noble gatherings, and endless political discussions had taught him to expect hidden motives behind every gesture. Yet Claire asked for nothing. She seemed completely unaware that every small act of kindness left an impression stronger than the grandest speeches delivered inside the royal hall. Far across the courtyard, Lady Vivian observed the scene from an upper balcony. She could not hear Claire's gentle words, but she saw enough to recognize that more servants had gathered simply to watch the stable girl at work. Their admiration unsettled her. Respect was meant to follow rank, tradition, and noble blood. Instead, it was quietly flowing towards someone who possessed none of those things. As the morning sun climbed higher above Blackwood Palace, Ethan looked once more at Claire surrounded by peaceful animals and understood that the mystery before him was no passing coincidence. Somewhere beneath her quiet life and humble smile rested a forgotten story, and for reasons he could not yet explain, destiny seemed determined to place that story directly in the path of a king. That evening, long after the palace corridors had fallen quiet, Ethan Blackwood stood alone inside the royal archives, surrounded by shelves that held centuries of forgotten history. Candlelight flickered across worn leather bindings as he searched. Through journals that few people even remembered existed. He had spent his life studying treaties, family records, and the laws that governed every corner of his kingdom, yet none of them explained why his wolf had chosen to guard Claire Bennett with such unwavering devotion. At the far end of the library, an elderly scholar named Arthur Whitlock carefully closed the book he had been restoring and looked toward the king. "You have been searching the same question for hours, Your Majesty," he said with a gentle smile. Ethan nodded. "My wolf has never behaved this way before." Arthur slowly walked to one of the oldest cabinets in the archives and withdrew a weathered volume bound in faded blue leather. Dust drifted into the air as he opened it with practiced care. "There is one account that has been dismissed as legend for generations," he said quietly. "Most believed it belonged with fairy tales rather than history." Ethan stepped closer. The fragile pages contained illustrations of wolves resting beside ordinary people, along with handwritten notes from rulers who had lived hundreds of years earlier. Arthur traced one passage with his finger before reading aloud. "When the guardian wolf recognizes a soul before its alpha does, it will protect that person without command, without hesitation, and without fear. Such devotion cannot be taught, demanded, or broken." Ethan remained silent. The words described exactly what he had witnessed. Arthur continued reading. "The bond begins not with power, but with character. Those who carry compassion without pride often awaken instincts older than memory itself." The elderly scholar gently closed the book. "No one has recorded such an event in nearly 3 centuries. Ethan looked down at the faded cover, deep in thought. Then perhaps it has happened again. At that very moment, unaware that ancient records were being studied because of her, Claire finished cleaning the last row of stalls before carrying a lantern toward the small room where servants stored blankets and supplies. She found a basket of fresh apples that had been delivered earlier that afternoon and quietly selected the bruised ones that would otherwise be discarded. Rather than keeping them for herself, She carried them outside to the retired carriage horses grazing beneath the evening sky. One by one, they wandered toward her with relaxed confidence, accepting the fruit from her hands before gently nudging her shoulder in gratitude. Claire laughed softly, brushing a chestnut mare along its neck. You always know how to brighten a long day. Hidden nearby, the silver wolf watched without making a sound. It neither approached nor interrupted. It simply remained close enough to see her, its golden eyes calm beneath the rising moon. When Claire finally noticed the familiar figure resting beneath a nearby oak tree, she smiled as though greeting an old friend. You came back, she whispered. The great wolf slowly rose and walked toward her. Instead of stopping several feet away, it lowered its head until Claire could gently scratch behind one ear. The wolf closed its eyes with complete trust. There was no fear in the moment, only peaceful understanding. High above them, the first full moon of autumn emerged from behind drifting clouds, bathing the palace grounds in silver light. From the library window, Ethan happened to glance outside. He watched the quiet scene unfold in the distance and remembered every word Arthur had just read. The oldest stories in his kingdom had never claimed that destiny announced itself with thunder or grand ceremonies. Sometimes it arrived in silence, revealed only through small acts of kindness that even the person living them never recognized. The annual autumn court reception filled Blackwood Palace with music, polished marble, and the quiet confidence of families who had spent generations believing they belonged within those grand walls. Crystal chandeliers reflected hundreds of warm lights across the ballroom, while nobles exchanged graceful smiles and carefully measured compliments. Yet beneath the elegance, one conversation overshadowed every other. They spoke in hushed voices about the stable girl the Alpha King's wolf refused to leave. Lady Vivian Ashcroft listened patiently until she could no longer tolerate hearing Claire Bennet's name spoken with growing curiosity instead of quiet dismissal. She stepped toward the palace steward and said with gentle confidence, "If these rumors continue, people may begin believing that anyone can claim importance simply because of a coincidence. For the dignity of the court, perhaps the matter should be settled." The steward hesitated. "What do you suggest?" Vivian smiled politely. "Invite the stable girl to the reception. Let everyone see that she is only an ordinary servant. Rumors disappear when truth stands in the light." The suggestion reached Ethan only moments before the reception began. He understood the hidden intention immediately, but instead of refusing, he quietly agreed. If questions had already spread across the kingdom, hiding Claire would only make them stronger. A royal messenger found Claire in the stables just as she finished brushing Willow's coat. She looked up in surprise when she was handed a formal invitation bearing the royal seal. "There must be some mistake," she said softly. "I have never attended a court reception. His Majesty requests your presence," the messenger replied respectfully. With no reason to refuse, Claire carefully washed away the dust of the day's work and changed into the simplest clean dress she owned, a pale blue gown that had belonged to another servant years before. It fit imperfectly, but she straightened the sleeves with quiet dignity before making her way toward the ballroom. The moment she entered, conversations faded almost at once. Dozens of curious eyes followed her as she stood uncertainly near the entrance, clearly uncomfortable beneath so much attention. Claire lowered her gaze, hoping only to remain unnoticed until the evening ended. Lady Vivian approached first, her smile flawless. "Welcome," she said warmly enough for everyone nearby to hear. "I imagine this is your first time attending such an event." Claire nodded politely. "Yes, ma'am." "Then perhaps you are unfamiliar with court customs," Vivian continued. "Guests are expected to remain in designated areas. The royal family and honored nobles gather near the central hall. Servants generally wait closer to the outer gallery." Claire accepted the words without complaint. "Thank you for telling me." She quietly stepped away exactly as instructed, never realizing that several nobles had overheard the conversation and exchanged uncomfortable glances. Her humility only made Vivian's carefully polished courtesy seem less sincere. From across the ballroom, Ethan watched everything unfold without interrupting. He noticed that Claire neither defended herself nor showed resentment. She simply chose kindness over embarrassment, just as she had with every frightened animal in the palace. At that same moment, The great silver wolf entered through the open archway leading from the royal gardens. The music gradually faded as every eye turned toward the legendary guardian. Without hesitation, without looking toward the king, and without acknowledging any noble gathered inside the magnificent hall, the wolf crossed the polished marble floor in complete silence until it reached Claire's side. Then, before the entire court, it calmly lay beside her feet, as though there was no place in the world it would rather be. Silence settled across the ballroom so completely that even the musicians lowered their instruments. No one had ever witnessed the royal guardian ignore rank, ceremony, and centuries of tradition with such quiet certainty. The great silver wolf rested beside Claire Bennet, as though every polished marble floor and jeweled chandelier around them meant nothing compared to remaining at her side. Claire stood perfectly still, her cheeks warming with embarrassment as dozens of noble families stared in open disbelief. She looked down at the magnificent animal and whispered almost apologetically, "Everyone is watching us." The wolf answered only by lifting its head and blinking slowly, completely at ease. Ethan Blackwood watched from the center of the hall, and for the first time since becoming king, he realized there was no command he could give that would change what had already happened. His wolf had made its choice freely. Arthur Whitlock's words echoed through his mind. The oldest bonds began not with power, but with character. Ethan stepped forward, crossing the ballroom one measured stride at a time. The nobles instinctively moved aside, creating a clear path between the king and the quiet young woman who still looked as though she wished she could disappear back into the familiar comfort of the stables. Claire lowered her head respectfully as Ethan stopped before her. "Your Majesty," she said softly, "I am sorry if I have caused trouble." Ethan studied her expression. There was no ambition in her eyes, no pride, no expectation of reward. She seemed genuinely concerned that her presence had disturbed the evening. Before he could answer, Lady Vivian stepped forward with graceful confidence. "Your Majesty," she said, her voice calm and carefully measured. "Perhaps the wolf is simply reacting to curiosity. After all, unusual things sometimes happen around animals. It would be unfortunate if the court misunderstood a passing moment." Several nobles nodded politely, grateful for an explanation that restored the familiar order of their world. Ethan remained silent for a long moment before turning toward Arthur Whitlock, who had quietly entered the ballroom after hearing the growing commotion. The elderly scholar carried the ancient blue leather volume beneath one arm. At the king's request, he opened the fragile pages and addressed the gathering. "Many generations ago," Arthur began, "our ancestors recorded that the guardian wolf recognizes hearts untouched by pride before any crown or title can do the same. Such devotion has never been earned through status. It has always been awakened through compassion." Murmurs spread throughout the hall as the oldest families exchanged uncertain looks. Arthur gently closed the book. "Whether you consider these records history or legend, there has never been a documented case in which the guardian wolf chose incorrectly." Ethan looked once more at Claire, remembering every quiet act of kindness he had witnessed over the past several days. She had asked for nothing. She had expected nothing. Yet every living creature around her seemed to feel safe simply because she existed. Without another word, Ethan removed the royal cloak resting across his shoulders. It was woven from deep midnight blue wool and embroidered with the silver crest of House Blackwood, a garment reserved only for the ruling family. Gasps echoed softly through the ballroom as he carefully placed the warm cloak around Claire's shoulders. She looked up in complete surprise. "Your Majesty, I cannot accept this." Ethan smiled gently. "This is not a reward, Claire Bennet. It is recognition." The silver wolf rose gracefully and stood beside them both, calm and unwavering. No one spoke. No one objected. In that unforgettable moment, every person inside Blackwood Palace understood that the measure of true worth had never been written in family names, wealth, or noble titles. Sometimes the oldest truths revealed themselves through simple kindness, and even a king possessed enough wisdom to recognize them when they appeared. Silence settled across the ballroom so completely that even the musicians lowered their instruments. No one had ever witnessed the royal guardian ignore rank, ceremony, and centuries of tradition with such quiet certainty. The great silver wolf rested beside Claire Bennet, as though every polished marble floor and jeweled chandelier around them meant nothing compared to remaining at her side. Claire stood perfectly still, her cheeks warming with embarrassment as dozens of noble families stared in open disbelief. She looked down at the magnificent animal and whispered almost apologetically, "Everyone is watching us." The wolf answered only by lifting its head and blinking slowly, completely at ease. Ethan Blackwood watched from the center of the hall, and for the first time since becoming king, he realized there was no command he could give that would change what had already happened. His wolf had made its choice freely. Arthur Whitlock's words echoed through his mind. The oldest bonds began not with power, but with character. Ethan stepped forward, crossing the ballroom one measured stride at a time. The nobles instinctively moved aside, creating a clear path between the king and the quiet young woman who still looked as though she wished she could disappear back into the familiar comfort of the stables. Claire lowered her head respectfully as Ethan stopped before her. "Your Majesty," she said softly, "I am sorry if I have caused trouble." Ethan studied her expression. There was no ambition in her eyes, no pride, no expectation of reward. She seemed genuinely concerned that her presence had disturbed the evening. Before he could answer, Lady Vivian stepped forward with graceful confidence. "Your Majesty," she said, her voice calm and carefully measured. "Perhaps the wolf is simply reacting to curiosity. After all, unusual things sometimes happen around animals. It would be unfortunate if the court misunderstood a passing moment." Several nobles nodded politely, grateful for an explanation that restored the familiar order of their world. Ethan remained silent for a long moment before turning toward Arthur Whitlock, who had quietly entered the ballroom after hearing the growing commotion. The elderly scholar carried the ancient blue leather volume beneath one arm. At the king's request, he opened the fragile pages and addressed the gathering. "Many generations ago," Arthur began, "our ancestors recorded that the guardian wolf recognizes hearts untouched by pride before any crown or title can do the same. Such devotion has never been earned through status. It has always been awakened through compassion." Murmurs spread throughout the hall as the oldest families exchanged uncertain looks. Arthur gently closed the book. "Whether you consider these records history or legend, there has never been a documented case in which the guardian wolf chose incorrectly." Ethan looked once more at Claire, remembering every quiet act of kindness he had witnessed over the past several days. She had asked for nothing. She had expected nothing. Yet every living creature around her seemed to feel safe simply because she existed. Without another word, Ethan removed the royal cloak resting across his shoulders. It was woven from deep midnight blue wool and embroidered with the silver crest of House Blackwood, a garment reserved only for the ruling family. Gasps echoed softly through the ballroom as he carefully placed the warm cloak around Claire's shoulders. She looked up in complete surprise. "Your Majesty, I cannot accept this." Ethan smiled gently. "This is not a reward, Claire Bennett. It is recognition." The silver wolf rose gracefully and stood beside them both, calm and unwavering. No one spoke. No one objected. In that unforgettable moment, every person inside Blackwood Palace understood that the measure of true worth had never been written in family names, wealth, or noble titles. Sometimes the oldest truths revealed themselves through simple kindness, and even a king possessed enough wisdom to recognize them when they appeared. The days that followed changed Blackwood Palace in ways no royal decree ever could. The whispers did not disappear overnight, but their tones slowly transformed. Servants who had once hurried past Claire Bennett without a glance now greeted her with warm smiles. Stable hands who had always respected her quiet dedication began speaking openly about her kindness, recalling countless moments they had almost forgotten. She had shared her meals with exhausted workers, stayed late to care for aging horses, and offered comfort without expecting recognition. None of those acts had changed. Only the people who witnessed them had. Claire herself remained exactly the same. Each morning before sunrise, she walked to the stables, checked every horse, replaced fresh water, and greeted each familiar animal by name. She continued wearing simple clothes beneath the royal cloak Ethan had given her, carefully folding it away whenever she worked because she did not want to stain something that carried such meaning. The silver wolf still found her every day. Sometimes it rested quietly outside the stable doors while she worked. Other times it followed several steps behind as she carried feed across the palace grounds. Eventually, no one questioned the sight anymore. It became part of the rhythm of palace life, as natural as the sunrise itself. Ethan often visited the stables now, though never with unnecessary ceremony. He asked Claire about the horses, the changing weather, and the small routines that kept the animals healthy through the coming winter. To his surprise, those conversations became the most peaceful moments of his day. Claire never spoke to impress him. She answered honestly, smiled easily, and reminded him that leadership was not only measured by the strength to command, but also by the willingness to listen. Little by little, Ethan found himself looking forward to those quiet mornings more than the grand meetings that filled the rest of his schedule. Even Lady Vivian Ashcroft began to see the truth she had resisted. She watched from a distance as Claire thanked every servant who helped her, remembered the names of the youngest stable boys, and celebrated the smallest successes of those around her. There was no ambition hidden beneath her kindness. It was simply who she had always been. One crisp morning, Arthur Whitlock joined Ethan beside the pasture where Claire laughed as a group of young foals chased one another through the golden grass. The silver wolf rested peacefully nearby, watching over them all. Arthur smiled. The old records never promised that destiny would change a kingdom through great battles. Ethan looked toward Claire as a cool breeze carried strands of her ash-blonde hair across her face. She gently tucked them behind one ear before offering an apple to the smallest foal. "How did they say it would happen?" Ethan asked quietly. Arthur folded his hands behind his back, one heart at a time. Ethan nodded slowly, understanding at last. His kingdom had always believed greatness was inherited through bloodlines, titles, and crowns. Yet the greatest lesson had arrived wearing worn boots, carrying buckets of water, and sleeping on a bed of straw without losing compassion for anyone around her. As the morning sun climbed above Blackwood Palace, Claire looked up to find Ethan standing at the pasture fence. Their eyes met, and for the first time neither uncertainty nor distance remained between them. The silver wolf calmly walked forward before settling on the grass between them, not as a barrier, but as a quiet promise that the path ahead would never have to be walked alone. And beneath the endless autumn sky, where kindness had accomplished what power never could, a new chapter quietly began, proving that true strength is always gentle, and the hearts willing to protect others are often the ones most worthy of being chosen.